It was our second night in Yosemite, and already things were feeling off. The first day had been the usual, hiking trails, taking photos by the waterfalls, and sharing ghost stories by the campfire. Classic stuff. But when dusk settled on our second evening, that's when it all began. "Hey, what's that?" Tim was the first to notice, pointing up toward the cliffs that towered above our campsite. He squinted, frowning at something none of us could quite make out. I followed his gaze. At first, I saw nothing but the jagged outline of the granite rocks, black against the twilight sky. But then, there it was. A silhouette. Something tall. Too tall to be human, standing motionless on the edge of the cliff, its form barely distinguishable against the deepening night. "Probably just a tree," I muttered, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Tim didn't respond. He just kept staring, his face pale in the firelight. We all went to bed soon after, trying to shrug off the weirdness. But sleep didn't come easily. The wind howled through the trees, making the tent walls ripple like someone, or something, was brushing past. Around midnight, I woke up to a rustling sound outside. Groggy, I sat up, thinking it was one of the others stumbling around in the dark. But when I peeked out of the tent flap, I froze. There, just beyond the fire pit, was the figure. This time, it was standing at the edge of our campsite, its shadowy form barely visible in the moonlight. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But it didn't move. It just watched. Morning brought little comfort. I wasn't the only one who had seen it. "I swear, man, something was out there last night," Tim said, his voice hushed as we gathered around the dying campfire. He looked at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot from lack of sleep. "I saw it too," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just standing there." The rest of the group fell silent, a thick tension hanging in the air. Jen, usually the rational one, shook her head. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. Shadows or something. But even she didn't sound convinced. We decided to take a hike that day, hoping a bit of daylight and movement would shake the eerie feeling that had settled over us. The trail we chose wound up the side of a cliff, the same cliff where we had seen the figure the night before. As we climbed, I couldn't help but feel watched. The trees around us, tall and ancient, seemed to press in closer, their branches creaking in the wind like they were whispering to one another. Every now and then, I caught glimpses of something through the trees, a flash of movement, a shape darting between the rocks. But every time I looked directly, it was gone. "Anyone else feeling weird?" Jen asked, her voice tight with nervous laughter. We all nodded, none of us wanting to admit how unsettled we really felt. We reached the top of the cliff by late afternoon, the view stretching out below us. Yosemite's valleys and rivers looked peaceful from up here, the world below too far away to feel real. But something else caught my eye, something much closer. A pile of stones, carefully stacked at the edge of the cliff, as if marking a spot. And not far from the stones, in the dirt, were enormous footprints. What the hell? Tim crouched down, tracing the edges of the prints with his fingers. They were massive, far too big to belong to any human. But they weren't quite animal either, the toes were too long, the shape almost human-like. "We need to leave," Jen whispered, her voice trembling now. "We need to leave now." Suddenly, a low, guttural sound echoed through the trees. It was distant, but unmistakable, like the sound of something ancient and huge. Something watching. And then, from the trees below, we saw it again. Several figures, moving slowly through the forest. They were closer now. Much closer. Too close. We ran. There wasn't much discussion, we just bolted down the trail, the looming figures now far too real. They weren't just standing still anymore, they were moving, slowly but purposefully, like predators stalking prey. The descent felt endless. My legs burned, my breath came in ragged gasps, and every time I glanced over my shoulder, I saw them. Dark shapes slipping through the trees, keeping pace with us but never showing their full form. It was like they were toying with us, letting us run but always staying just close enough to remind us we couldn't escape. Faster! Tim screamed from the front, his voice cracking with fear. But no matter how fast we ran, the figures kept their distance, never attacking, never revealing themselves fully. As we neared the bottom of the trail, something changed. The wind picked up, carrying with it a sickeningly sweet odor, like decaying flowers. The forest, which had been alive with the sound of rustling leaves and distant birds, fell silent. Completely silent. Not a single sound except our footsteps pounding against the dirt path. Did you hear that? Jen's voice broke through the quiet, barely a whisper. We all stopped, gasping for breath, our heads snapping to the side as we heard it again. A low, scraping noise. It came from the trees directly to our right. The branches moved, parting just enough to reveal nothing. The space beyond was black, impossibly dark, like the trees were hiding something too horrific to be seen in the light. I could feel eyes on us, the weight of 100 unseen stares, watching from the blackness. And then, they stepped out. The figures. Huge, towering over us, their shapes barely human. Their skin, if you could even call it that, was the color of stone, their limbs grotesquely long, fingers ending in sharp, claw-like points. Their heads were misshapen, almost featureless, except for the glowing, deep-set eyes that stared unblinking at us. They moved with an unnatural grace, their bodies swaying slightly as they advanced. The ground beneath my feet felt like it was pulling me down, my legs refusing to move as pure terror gripped me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. But Tim did. Run! We sprinted again, but this time, it was different. The creatures moved faster, closing the distance between us in a matter of seconds. The scraping sound grew louder, and I realized with horror that it wasn't coming from the trees, it was coming from them. Their claws dragged against the ground, as if savoring the chase. Suddenly, Tim screamed. I turned just in time to see one of the figures lunging at him, its clawed hand outstretched. It didn't hit him, though. It stopped short, as if bound by some invisible force. The creature let out a horrible, guttural noise, its glowing eyes locked on us, before stepping back into the shadows. What the hell? Tim stammered, his face pale as a ghost. They weren't attacking. Not yet. But they were there, waiting, as if biding their time. And that's when I realized, we weren't leaving this place. Not alive. They were letting us run because they wanted us to, like a game. A sick, twisted game. We weren't escaping. We were being herded. We could barely speak as we stumbled through the forest, our nerves frayed, senses heightened to every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves. The figures no longer tried to hide. They moved just outside the edges of our vision, dark shapes slipping in and out of the shadows, staying close enough to remind us they were there but never attacking. Jen was the first to break the silence, her voice barely a whisper. They're not killing us. Why aren't they killing us? I didn't have an answer. None of us did. But the sinking realization was dawning on me that this was worse than any quick, brutal attack. We were trapped in their game, and whatever the rules were, we didn't know how to win. We reached the edge of a clearing, a place where the trees parted to reveal a wide, rocky plateau overlooking the valley. The setting sun bathed everything in an eerie orange glow, and for a moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we'd found a way out. We could see far into the distance, the winding river below, the road stretching toward the park entrance. So close. Tim dropped to his knees, gasping for breath. We just need to get to the road. If we make it there, someone will find us. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to hold on to the hope that we could still escape this nightmare. But the figures, they were watching. I could feel it. We took a moment to gather ourselves, the reality of our situation sinking in like a weight pressing on our chests. Then Jen pointed toward the cliffs again, her hand trembling. Look, at first, I thought it was just the wind or the trick of the fading light, but then I saw them. Not just one or two figures this time, but dozens. Lined along the top of the cliffs like sentinels, their massive forms standing still, watching us. They blended so perfectly with the rocks that it was impossible to tell how long they had been there, watching us the entire time. And then they moved, not in unison, but one by one, stepping closer to the edge, leaning forward like they were getting ready to descend. "They're coming," Tim whispered, his voice trembling. "They're coming down." We had no time. Panic took over again, and we bolted for the forest edge, hoping to find cover, something, anything, that would buy us more time. But as we ran, something shifted. The ground beneath our feet felt wrong, like we were running in circles, never actually getting anywhere. No matter how far we went, the trees seemed to bend, the path curving back toward the cliff. The deeper we went, the more the forest felt like it was closing in on us. I could see the figures out of the corner of my eye, darting between the trees, always just behind us. We were being pushed back. Pushed toward the cliffs. "They're not letting us leave," Jen cried, her voice cracking. "Oh God, they're hurting us like animals." She was right. No matter how fast we ran, no matter which direction we turned, the figures closed in tighter. They were closing the circle. And then the sound began. A low, rhythmic thumping. It echoed through the trees, vibrating in the air, in the ground beneath our feet. At first, I thought it was distant thunder, but as it grew louder, I realized it was something else: footsteps. Heavy, pounding footsteps. And they were getting closer. In the distance, at the top of the cliffs, the first of the figures stepped off the edge. I watched, horrified, as it descended, not falling, but moving with slow, deliberate grace, like it was walking down an invisible staircase. More of them followed, one after another, their towering shapes growing larger, their glowing eyes fixed on us. We were out of time. There was nowhere left to run. Jen stopped, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "We have to fight. It's the only chance." Tim turned, his face pale. "Fight what?" There, his words cut off as the thumping grew deafening, and the figures emerged fully from the trees, surrounding us on all sides. The one in front stepped forward, its grotesque hand outstretched, claws gleaming in the fading light. It wasn't rushing. It didn't need to. We were trapped. And they knew it. I looked around wildly, searching for anything, any way out. But the figures had formed a perfect circle around us. There was no escape. Then, in one horrifying moment, I realized what they had been waiting for all along. The sun dipped below the horizon, and darkness fell. That's when they attacked. As soon as the sun disappeared, the air shifted. It was like the darkness itself became alive, thicker, heavier, suffocating. The pounding of footsteps stopped, replaced by a deafening silence that pressed down on us. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, but everything else, the wind, the trees, even our breathing, seemed to fade away into the blackness. Then, they moved. The figures, once slow and deliberate, surged toward us in unison. It was as if the darkness had given them power, unleashing something primal and terrible. Their glowing eyes locked onto us, and they moved impossibly fast, their long limbs stretching out like grotesque shadows. Tim screamed, but it was cut short as one of the creatures lunged forward, its clawed hand closing around his throat. In the dim light, I saw it lift him off the ground like he weighed nothing, his legs kicking helplessly in the air. His eyes bulged in horror, and for a moment, we all stood frozen, unable to move or comprehend what was happening. Then, with a sickening snap, the creature threw Tim's lifeless body into the trees. "Run!" Jen screamed, but it was useless. The circle had closed. There was nowhere left to go. I grabbed a branch off the ground, swinging it wildly in front of me like it would somehow protect me from the monsters closing in. One of them stepped closer, its huge form looming over me, and for a moment, I locked eyes with it. Those glowing, inhuman eyes. I couldn't look away, hypnotized by the void within them. Then, it reached for me. I swung the branch with all my strength, but it barely seemed to notice. The creature's clawed hand swiped toward me, and I felt the sharp sting of its claws as they grazed my arm, leaving deep, burning gashes. Jen screamed again, and I turned just in time to see her fall to the ground, one of the creatures pinning her with its massive weight. It moved so fast, I barely had time to process it. 1 second she was standing next to me, the next she was gone, swallowed by the blackness and the towering figure above her. The others closed in, their eyes glowing brighter, their forms blending into the darkness like living shadows. I could hear the scraping of their claws on the ground, feel the weight of their presence pressing down on me. Then, just as the closest one reached out for me, something unexpected happened. A light, a small, flickering light, cut through the darkness. It wasn't much, just a dim orange glow at first, but it grew stronger with each passing second. I turned toward the source and saw it, a fire. Our fire, the one we had left smoldering earlier at the campsite, had somehow roared back to life. The flames crackled wildly, casting long shadows that danced across the trees. But more importantly, the creatures recoiled from it. Their glowing eyes blinked, their massive forms retreating, like the fire was something they couldn't endure. For a moment, I was stunned. The fire, it was keeping them at bay. Jen! I shouted, my voice raw with panic. The fire! Get to the fire! She crawled toward me, blood soaking her shirt from where the creature had clawed at her. Together, we stumbled toward the campfire, barely able to stay upright. Behind us, the creatures snarled, their movements growing more frantic as the flames flared higher. We collapsed next to the fire, the heat blistering against our skin, but it was the only thing keeping them away. The creatures circled us, pacing just beyond the reach of the light, their glowing eyes filled with hunger, fury, and something else, something ancient, something malevolent. They were waiting. We're trapped, Jen whispered, her voice shaking. They're going to kill us. It's just a matter of time. I didn't know what to say. She was right. The fire was our only defense, but it wouldn't last forever. Already, the wood was burning low, the flames beginning to shrink. And then I remembered the pile of stones. The strange markings on the ground up on the cliffs, where we had seen those enormous footprints earlier. It wasn't just a marker, it was something more. A boundary, maybe. A warning. What if we make a circle? I said suddenly, my voice trembling with the idea. A circle of fire. Maybe that's why they didn't attack us before. Maybe they can't cross a boundary. Jen looked at me, her eyes filled with desperation, but she nodded. It's worth a try. We scrambled to gather whatever wood we could find, dragging it toward the fire and arranging it in a rough circle around us. The creatures moved closer, their snarling growing louder, more agitated, as if they knew what we were trying to do. With shaking hands, I lit another branch from the fire, using it to ignite the circle. The flames caught quickly, spreading in a ring around us, burning brightly against the encroaching night. And just like that, the creatures stopped. They paced outside the ring, their glowing eyes fixed on us, but they didn't cross the line. The fire, this fragile, temporary barrier, was holding them back. We were safe. For now. But deep down, I knew the truth. We wouldn't survive the night. The fire wouldn't last, and once it died, there would be nothing to stop them. As the creatures circled us, waiting for the flames to fade, I realized something else. We weren't the first. This was a game they'd played before, and we were just the latest players. And like everyone else before us, we wouldn't leave this place alive.